For centuries, Viking buildings, ships, fences and sacred structures endured wild weather, brutal winters, and constant moisture, yet much of their timber has survived in conditions that would destroy modern lumber in a decade. Archaeologists have uncovered Viking beams pulled from bogs, coastlines, and burial sites that remain astonishingly intact, despite having no synthetic preservatives, pressure-treating plants, or modern sealants. So how did the Vikings make wood last nearly forever? Their techniques formed a layered system of science, ritual, and environmental knowledge, most of it lost to time, but increasingly rediscovered through archaeology and experimental woodcraft. Wood selection, the first line of immortality. The Vikings didn't treat all wood equally. They began with careful species selection, something many modern builders overlook. Pine, oak, and birch were their main building woods, but not just any trees. They preferred slow-grown northern pine with dense growth rings, old-growth oak harvested in winter, resin-rich trees from windy slopes or cold valleys. Trees that grow under stress actually develop denser fibers and more natural preservatives like pitch and tannins. The Vikings, well, they figured out that these woods resisted insects and decay way better than timber that grew quickly. These days, most modern timber is grown in plantations under, pretty ideal conditions, but that means it's softer and more vulnerable, which is honestly one reason it decays faster, even with chemical treatments. Winter harvesting is, in a way, nature's built-in preservative. The Vikings would only cut wood during the coldest months, and actually, this is a tradition echoed by a lot of ancient cultures. Winter harvesting, reduces sap content, microbial activity, and insect presence. When wood is low in moisture and sugars, it becomes far more resistant to rot. Even today, traditional Scandinavian carpenters insist winter-felled logs remain stronger and more stable, something science has now confirmed. One of the most fascinating Viking techniques was stockseta, a process of soaking timber in seawater or brackish fjord water for months, sometimes up to 2 years. So, this soaking did several things, and one of the main effects was salt infusion. Salt water actually penetrates the wood fibers, making them resistant to fungus, hostile to boring insects, and a lot less likely to warp or crack. Salt also, crystallizes inside the fibers over time, locking out moisture. And over really long periods, minerals from seawater slowly replace the organic components in the wood. This doesn't actually turn the timber to stone, but it does preserve it in a kind of semi-petrified state. Many of the Viking Age timbers recovered today still contain high levels of salt and minerals, which is honestly why they remain astonishingly well preserved. Charring the surface, known as the Viking burn seal. So, long before the Japanese developed shōsugi ban, the Vikings actually practiced a similar method: surface charring. They would lightly burn the exposed faces of posts, beams, and planks. The carbonized layer created a waterproof barrier, insect resistance, a fire-slow surface, and, protection against fungal spores. Charring also hardens the exterior while leaving the inner wood flexible, a perfect combination for long-lasting structures and ships. Even fence posts charred and buried by Vikings remain intact centuries later. Resin, tar, and pitch, nature's perfect sealant. The Vikings were master tar makers. They produced large quantities of pine tar, distilling it slowly in earth kilns, a process that could take days. This thick, smoky resin was brushed onto wood in multiple coats. Tar offered deep waterproofing, UV protection, antifungal and antibacterial properties, and even resistance to saltwater erosion. Their ships, iconic longboats, were drenched in tar, giving them their dark sheen and legendary durability. This natural preservative was so effective that Scandinavian boats tarred in the medieval period have survived into the modern day. Smart engineering, keeping wood dry while letting it breathe. Vikings didn't rely only on treatments, they used clever construction. Their buildings incorporated high foundations to lift beams above damp soil, steep roofs, to shed rain-ventilated walls that prevented condensation, wooden shingles treated with tar, and raised thresholds that kept interiors dry. This passive engineering ensured moisture never lingered long enough for rot to begin. Some Viking practices, framed as spiritual or symbolic, had intense preservation value. Animals' fat, blood, or fish oil were sometimes brushed on ritual wood. So these organic materials, they actually penetrate deeply, and they repel insects. Bog burial. Placing sacred objects or ship parts in bogs to slumber inadvertently preserved them through tannin-rich, oxygen-starved conditions. While these rituals were meant to protect spiritually, they often ended up preserving material objects for 1,000 years. Why do modern builders, struggle to replicate the longevity of Viking structures? Well, modern lumber actually decays faster for several reasons. Plantation wood, for instance, grows quickly and is a lot less dense. Chemicals just don't penetrate softwood evenly, and rush drying can lead to cracking and weak points. Builders today rarely use tar, charring, or mineral soaking, and pressure-treated wood is really optimized for cost, not for longevity. Ironically, Viking methods, which were entirely natural and honestly pretty low-tech, often outperform today's industrial preservatives. The Vikings weren't just warriors, they were exceptional engineers, foresters, and, wood scientists. Their methods actually allowed timber to survive fierce winters, storms at sea, and even centuries underground. Today, as eco-builders search for greener and more durable alternatives to chemical treatments, Viking woodcraft is, re-emerging as a model of sustainable preservation. Their timber didn't last forever by accident. It lasted because they understood wood, its life, its spirit, and its hidden strengths, better than, honestly, many do today.